This is State of Garrisons and Rise of Kingdoms. A year ago, one of the first long format videos I did was the State of Garrisons and Rise of Kingdoms, and then. In this video, I want to revisit that topic and talk about how they've changed to now. So in today's video, we're going to be going over the garrisons for each unit type, where they're strong, where they're weak, and what you can expect to build if you want to build a certain build path. But without further ado, let's get started. First, it would be a disservice for us not to talk about cavalry garrisons. When it comes to cavalry garrisons, the conversation really starts and ends with Jan. Jan is the strongest garrison in the game right now, and it's not hard to see why, between the fact that he does have an AoE that has a huge single target damage factor, even below 50% units, and you don't give up the reduced damage factor like you do with other AoE skills. It makes it great against single target, great against swarm, and just generally great. On top of the fact that he has skill damage increases to help himself and his allies, normal attack damage take reduction to resist swarm even further, and even the ability to just have more health and boost their normal attack damage to, again, help reduce swarm ability. It's just generally a good option. Other players in the garrison game when it comes to cavalry include Jadwiga, although she is not nearly as strong because she has just kind of fallen off and she's very squishy. And because of that, you will feel that when you get swarmed. And with the swarm heavy meta, it just makes her not as viable. Other options, of course, include Nevsky, even though he himself is not a garrison. He is commonly used with both Jadwiga and Jan, due to the fact that he has so much extra damage between his passive fourth skill and the health bonus he gives, helping him stay a little bit alive for longer when it comes to a garrison. And of course, in the case of mixed garrisons, either Heraclius or YSS, who are both great at resisting swarm and being forgiving with the mixed unit types. But overall, my personal preference in garrisons is to have Jan as a primary with either Heraclius or Nevsky, depending on what type of garrison you want to have. If you want to have a high single target damage garrison, Jan Nevsky is hard to go wrong with. If you want to resist swarm, which is probably going to be your standard procedure, you're going to want Jan Hera or Jan YSS. And they both will pay dividends for you when you do get swarmed, and it turns a lot of negative trades positive. And in fact, honestly, Jan Hera is one of the strongest garrisons I've ever seen. I've seen double rallies hit a Jan Hera, and the Jan Hera still wins. And that is something that really stands crazy on levels of like release Xeno YSS, with how broken that was on release. So it is really the closest thing to that we have right now, and it is pretty much completely worth the investment just because it's sheerly that strong, and we're that far away from the next Cav cycle since we just got Justinian and Huo. Now that we've covered the cavalry garrisons, let's talk about the infantry garrisons. Infantry is still very solid, and despite the fact that they're not as strong as current Cav garrisons, they're still strong in their own right. Flavius is where it really is with infantry garrisons. Zenobia is still pretty viable, but Flavius is in the most meta garrison pairings right now. He pretty much defines the infantry meta through the fact that he does so much damage on his own skill, and as well as the fact that he does continuous damage to help prevent reinforcement of rallies, and just general raw stats and counterattack damage to help resist swarm, making him great against swarm, which is typically a weaker spot that infantry garrisons have outside of Zenobia and Flavius. On top of the fact that he gets skill damage, which is super useful for the likes of Heraclius. Overall, you're going to see Flavius probably the most used, and some alternative options are in the infantry meta. Of course, we have Zenobia, and Zenobia is pretty much the choice if you don't have Flavius or you're getting back into garrisons after stopping for a while. Due to the fact that Zenobia was as popular as she was, she does still see a lot of use. And when you do use Zenobia Flavius, it is nice to have her as a primary, but you can even do Flavius Zenobia and get good results. But overall, Zenobia is a great option, although she is secondary to Flavius in most cases. Of course, just like with cavalry, one of your best options is running Hera and running mixed, which one of the few infantry mixed garrisons I recommend right now. given the fact that you like to have hold the line on commanders like Flavius when you can. And Heraclius naturally counters that. So if you're going to give that up, you need to make sure the commander is worth it, and Heraclius is definitely the option there. If you're looking for a more traditional city defense, Zenobia and YSS is still very solid, or you can even run Theo YSS if you have Theodora finished, but that isn't necessarily exclusive to just infantry. But overall, your main pairing you're going to have is an infantry garrison is probably Flavius Hera, but you may also see Flavius Zenobia or Zenobia Flavius, or you might even see Zenobia YSS in a pinch, just due to the fact that it's so versatile. But given Heraclius' strength, you'll probably see Heraclius more often than YSS. And last, but certainly not least, we have Archer Garrisons. Archer Garrisons are still in a pretty weak spot overall. Dido is very solid, but she doesn't quite stack up to the likes of Jan or the likes of Flavius in terms of their ability to resist swarm. And while she does have some natural resistance to normal attack damage, it's only when you have pure archers, which means a single cavalry unit or a single infantry unit can cost you 10% normal attack damage reduction in an instant, which is very difficult to justify for garrisons, especially in kingdoms that are newer, so it is much less forgiving than the likes of Flavius Hera or Jan Hera. You can run Dido and Hera, but you then, of course, lose this normal attack damage. Although with Hera, you do gain the normal attack damage on his expertise, which is 30% instead of the 10% of Dido. But that is a little bit of a trade, and it does sting a little bit versus just having a flat 10% to stack with Hera's 30. Overall, she does put out a good amount of damage. The ambushed effect is super useful. It is actually very similar to the defense debuff that Nevsky provides, because it does reduce the defense, and then it gives you the ambushed effect, which basically is going to stop them from surrounding you, which it basically acts as a counter Nevsky, and it does pretty well at countering the current Justinian as well. Typically, Dido is pretty much going to be exclusively paired with either Heraclius if you want to have a mixed garrison that is a little more resistant to swarm, or if you want to go for pure damage output, the likes of YSG or Liang are probably going to be what you see. But from what I've seen and what I've tested, the more I've found that Amani and Artemisia just don't quite stack up well enough with Dido to make them worth using. So as such, they're really falling out of the meta, and I don't recommend anybody who hasn't already built them and is planning on using them for garrisons to do so anymore. But now that we've tackled what's good in each troop type in Rise of Kingdoms for garrisons, I'm going to tackle some more of the build order. So if you were starting out day one as each troop type, here's what you need to do. So of course we're going to start with Cavs, since we started with Cavs for the garrison portion. If you were starting out as a Cav garrison player, the first commander I recommend you build is Jan. Jan is super versatile, super useful, and if you were already a Cav field player, you have Nevsky, which means day one, once you have Jan expertise, you have a garrison. It might not be as strong as Jan Hera, but it will be strong enough to hold you over until Heraclius is done. So this gives you a great option. Once you're done with Jan, I do recommend you work on Hera, because he is just so strong, and then if you're looking to expand further into different garrisons, whether it's infantry, archers, or otherwise, you already have a head start on that next pairing. On top of the fact that mixed garrisons are generally very forgiving for new players, especially players who are new to garrisons. So overall, that is my recommendation if you are a cavalry player. If you are an infantry player, I recommend you go for Flavius first. Flavius is super solid and really stacks up well, and even though he's been out for a while, unless the new infantry commanders are super strong, he's going to be around for a while. So if you are worried about the new infantry commanders making him obsolete, I would probably recommend you waiting, or I would recommend you building Heraclius, because whoever comes out next is probably going to be accepting of Heraclius, given how strong he is in the meta right now. But overall, my recommendation in order is either Flavius if you're dedicated to being infantry and you're sure he's going to be good for a while, because even if a new infantry commander comes up that's garrison, he'll probably pair with Flavius and probably pair with Hera. Or Heraclius if you want to go for a safer option, where if the infantry option falls through and you don't like the new infantry garrison, you can then go to Jan or Dido. For archers, I do recommend you go for Dido over Amani or Artemisia. She is solid. She's a little weak to swarm, but if you're already an archer player, you probably already have YSG. So just like Jan, day one, you have a viable garrison. And if you're a field player for a while, you might also have Liang, which means you have 2 viable garrison pairs. And then as you build up, again, I just recommend you work on Hera. Just overall, the more I've played, the more I've realized that I'm happy to have been wrong, that Hera is as good as he is. And this is a perfect example of it. So overall, no matter where you're going, I think Hera is a great option. And then basically, the first commander you can build should probably be based on what your main troop type is going to be. So now that we've talked about what garrisons are strong and what build order you should go into, let's just cover the question most people probably ask themselves before they become a garrison main. Should I build a garrison? And honestly, the answer is probably yes. Whether you need to defend your city on the off chance that you lose territory, whether you need to help an arc, whether you need to just be a fill-in. There are so many roles that garrison mains do that also can be done by regular players. Because for every garrison main, there needs to be a backup to be able to fill in until the garrison main can refresh. For every arc match, there's got to be somebody to help build that rally to swap in a fresh troop. No matter what playstyle you have, garrisons can help support you in one way or another. And it is great for your kingdom to have as many as possible, and it is great for your own well-being to be as well-rounded as possible in this game. Because you'll never know when you might be the difference between a lost flag and a 1 KvK, or a lost defense point that might cost your allies a couple of cities that get burned, or you being able to save those cities. So if you have the means to build one, and you have the gear, and you have the will, it's usually worth the build. And even if you were just building up to T5, you should always have in the back of your mind the thought of how you want to build garrisons. And even if you're not going to build these right now, it will be useful in the long run for you to have that in your mind and know that when you get to T5, maybe you should start looking at garrisons. Maybe you should start looking at ways to help the kingdom. Whether you are a tech spender or not, you can make a difference just by being there and being there to help and fill in. But with that, we're going to wrap up our discussion. This is something I've always felt super passionate about, as you probably can tell from my channel being very centered around garrisons. But let me know what you think. Are you planning on building garrisons anytime soon? Is this something that you have in your future? Even if it's not today or tomorrow, let me know in the comments. If you'd like for me to cover any other subject in Rise of Kingdoms, you can let me know down in the comments as well. Because oftentimes video comments and suggestions become future video topics. And as always, good luck, fight well, and I will see you on the battlefield.